The day my brother called me crying, begging me to help cover his mortgage, I was sitting in the conference room of my own company, about to sign paperwork on a $4.2 million commercial property deal. I almost didn't pick up. And honestly, I wish I hadn't. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all started. A Tuesday night in October, 6 years ago, sitting at the kitchen table in the house I grew up in, watching my parents choose my brother over me for the last time. His name was, well, I'll just call him my brother, because that's all he ever really was to me. A title, not a relationship. He was 3 years older, lived at home at 28, and had our parents completely wrapped around his finger in that quiet, suffocating way that families don't talk about until Thanksgiving dinners implode and everyone's crying in the driveway. He had this gift, I don't know what else to call it, for making himself the center of every room without ever doing anything remarkable. He'd walk in, my mum would light up, my dad would ask about his day like it was breaking news. Meanwhile, I'd gotten a promotion at my job, and the response at dinner that night had been, "Oh, that's nice, sweetie. Your brother was just telling us he's thinking about going back to school." He'd been thinking about going back to school for 4 years, but this isn't really about the small stuff. The accumulated slights of 26 years of being the second child, the girl. The one who didn't need as much because she always figured it out on her own. This is about one specific night, and one specific decision my parents made, and what happened because of it. I had moved back home temporarily. I want to be very clear about that word. Temporarily, after leaving a long-term relationship, and needing a few months to save money before getting my own place again. I was 26. I had a full-time job as a project coordinator at a mid-sized logistics firm in Denver. I paid them rent, I cooked dinner twice a week. I was not a burden. I was a daughter living in her childhood home for 4 months while she got back on her feet. My brother had been there for 2 years. The friction started almost immediately, though I didn't understand the shape of it until later. He'd make comments at dinner, little things. "It's crowded in here lately," said while looking directly at me, or he'd occupy the shared bathroom during exactly the window of time I needed to leave for work. And when I mentioned it, he'd act confused, like I was speaking a language he'd never heard. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. I'd known him my whole life. Maybe he was just going through something. Maybe we'd find a rhythm. We didn't. One evening in late October, I came home to find my mum sitting at the kitchen table with an expression I'd seen before. The one she wore when she'd already made a decision and was waiting for someone else to carry it out. My brother was standing near the refrigerator, arms crossed, not quite looking at me. My dad was at the counter, not making eye contact. My mum said, "Sit down, honey." I sat down. What followed was the most surreal 20 minutes of my life up to that point. She explained, and I used that word loosely, that my brother had expressed that having me in the house was affecting his mental health, that he felt like he couldn't decompress in his own space, that he needed the house to feel like a safe environment, and my presence was making that difficult for him. I waited for the part where she told me they'd talked to him about this, set some expectations, asked him to be more flexible. That part never came. Instead, my dad cleared his throat and said they thought it might be better if I found somewhere else to stay. "Just until things settle down," he said. "Maybe an apartment. You're doing well at work." I looked at my brother. He was studying the floor. "You're asking me to leave," I said, "because he's uncomfortable." "We're not asking you to leave forever," my mum said quickly. "We just think, for right now." "He's been here for 2 years," I said. "I've been here for 6 weeks. Silence. "You're choosing him," I said. My dad started to say something about it not being about choosing, about the whole family needing to be considered, and I remember thinking very clearly, there is nothing for me here. Not a defense, not an apology. Nothing. I went upstairs. I packed 2 bags. I called my friend. The person I'd go on to call my best friend. The one who showed up in 45 minutes with her Subaru and didn't say a single thing except, "You hungry?" When she got there, I walked out of that house with my 2 bags and the very concrete understanding that I was not going to call them the next day. I was not going to give them the chance to smooth it over with a "we love you both" and pretend the thing they'd just done wasn't the thing they'd just done. I didn't call. And they didn't call either. Not for 6 years. The first year was the hardest, and not because of them. It was hard because I was 26 and suddenly had no safety net, the kind you don't even realize exists until it doesn't. My friend let me crash on her couch for 3 weeks, and I want to say for the record that those 3 weeks changed me in a way I'm still finding words for. She never made me feel like a problem. She made coffee every morning and left it on the counter and went about her day and let me have whatever I needed to be. I've tried to be that for other people since then. It's the best thing I can think to do with it. I got an apartment, 580 square feet in a neighborhood in Denver that was optimistically called up and coming, and realistically had one working street light for every 4 blocks. I slept on an air mattress for 2 months because I refused to touch my savings. I was terrified of the account going below a certain number, a number that felt like the floor between me and something I didn't want to name. I bought groceries strategically. I made coffee at home. I worked. I also started learning things. I'd always had an interest in supply chain. It was why I'd ended up in logistics in the first place. But I'd been coasting in my coordinator role, doing good work but not pushing. After I moved out, something shifted. I started taking courses at night, certifications. I read obsessively. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. They weren't watching. It was more like I'd been handed a very specific kind of silence, and I filled it with work, because work was the one place I still made complete sense to myself. By 28, I'd moved up to a senior operations role. By 29, I was managing a team of 12. By 30, I had enough saved that I started paying serious attention to what I actually wanted to do with the knowledge I'd been quietly stockpiling. There was a gap I kept seeing in regional distribution, a specific inefficiency in how mid-sized companies handled last-mile logistics between Denver and the surrounding mountain towns. I'd seen it from the inside for years. I knew exactly what it cost companies and why no one had built a clean solution for it yet. I wrote a business plan, the way other people journal, late at night, obsessively, drafting and redrafting until it made the kind of sense that felt airtight. I found a co-founder through a professional network, a woman who'd spent 8 years at a freight startup and had complementary skills and zero patience for nonsense. We raised a seed round. We launched. We failed at 3 things immediately and fixed them. We grew. I'm not going to walk through every year because this isn't a TED Talk. What I will tell you is that by the time I was 32, we had signed contracts with 11 regional businesses, a team of 24 people, and a reputation in our niche that had taken a very long time to build, and that I was extremely protective of. And that fall, we closed on the lease for a commercial warehouse and office space, a $4.2 million deal that took 8 months to negotiate, and that I had worked toward with the specific, quiet ferocity of someone who'd had to learn early that no one else was going to do it for them. I had not spoken to my parents in 6 years. I had not spoken to my brother in 6 years. I didn't know where any of them were living, what they were doing, or whether they thought about that October night the way I did, which, if I'm honest, was less and less as the years went on. They had taken up so much space in my head in that first year, rent-free and noisy, and then gradually less, and then one day I realized I'd gone 2 weeks without thinking about them once. That felt like something. I wasn't sure if it was healing or distance or just the natural result of having built a life crowded enough with real things that there was no room left for ghosts. I should tell you about my co-founder's uncle, actually, because he played a role in all of this that I don't talk about enough. He's in his 60s, retired, spent 30 years in commercial real estate, and has the specific wisdom of someone who has watched a lot of people make a lot of expensive mistakes. He became an informal advisor to us in year 2, and at some point he became an informal advisor to me, which is different. He was the person who told me very plainly, don't let the people who didn't believe in you benefit from the people who did. He said it once, in a conversation about equity and early investors, but I wrote it down and it became something I said to myself in other contexts for years. He was also the one, when the family situation finally came up over dinner one night, who said, you don't owe a relationship to people just because they share your blood. You owe them nothing they haven't earned. He wasn't performing wisdom. He was just saying a true thing. I kept it. The call from my brother came on a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the middle of the conference room meeting. This was about 2 weeks after we'd signed the property paperwork, and I saw his name on my phone screen, and I actually stopped and stared at it for a second, because it had been so long that it took my brain a moment to place him. Not his face. The name. My brother. 6 years. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. "Hey," he said, and his voice was different, smaller, like something had gone out of it. "Hey," I said. There was a pause. Then he said he'd heard, through some extended family channel I hadn't known was tracking me, that I was doing well, that I'd started a company, that things were going good. Good felt like an understatement, but I didn't correct him. He said he was in a rough spot. He and his wife. I hadn't known he'd gotten married, had bought a house 3 years ago, and they'd gotten into some financial trouble, and he was a couple months behind on the mortgage. He didn't need a lot, he said. He just needed a bridge. He'd pay me back. I stood in that hallway for a long time after he stopped talking. I thought about the air mattress, the one working street light, the 2 bags I packed while my parents sat downstairs and let me go. I thought about 6 years of silence, and how none of them had wondered, apparently, how I was doing during any of it. Or if they had, they hadn't picked up a phone. I thought about the fact that the first call, the first contact in 6 years, was because he needed something. "I'm not going to be able to help with that," I said. He made a sound like he hadn't expected that, which told me something about what he'd expected. "I'm not angry," I said, because I wasn't, actually. I'd moved past angry somewhere around year 2. "But I don't have a relationship with you. We haven't spoken in 6 years. I don't know your wife's name. I didn't know you'd bought a house. You called me because you heard I had money, and I understand that, but that's not a relationship I can loan money into." "She's he started. "I know," I said. "I'm sure she's great. Mum and Dad are really struggling too," he said. And that was when I understood the whole shape of the conversation. It wasn't just him. It was a reaching out on behalf of all of them, a testing of the water, a see if she'll come back now that there's something to come back for. "I hope they're okay," I said, and I meant it in the limited way you can mean something about people who are strangers to you now, but I'm not in a position to step back into that. He asked if I was serious. He said I was being cold. He said family is family. And there it was, the phrase I'd been waiting for, the one that only ever seems to come up when the family in question wants something. Family is family. As if that were a self-contained argument. As if that phrase alone erased a Tuesday night in October, when being family hadn't been sufficient reason to ask him to be reasonable. To ask him to share a house for a few more months. To choose his sister over his comfort. "Family is family," I said. "I agree. Which is why what they did hurt as much as it did. I needed them to choose family then, and they didn't. That was their choice. This is mine." I told him I had to get back to my meeting. I told him I genuinely hoped things turned out okay for him. And then I hung up. I stood in the hallway for another minute. My hands weren't shaking. I wasn't crying. I felt something that took me a while to name. Not satisfaction exactly. Not the hot rush of revenge I might have imagined feeling at 26. It was quieter than that. It was more like, I know who I am now. I know what I built. And I built it without any of you. I went back into the conference room and finished the meeting. A few weeks later, I got a text from my mom. Short, careful. The kind of text written by someone who'd workshopped it. She said she'd heard from my brother that I'd been in touch, that she was glad I was doing well, that she'd love to reconnect sometime and catch up over coffee if I was ever open to it. I read it twice. I thought about what reconnecting would look like, the careful conversation, the way we'd all perform normalcy, the things that would go unsaid because saying them would make the coffee too uncomfortable, the way they'd work around the October night the way you work around a crack in a foundation, not fixing it, just choosing where to step. I put my phone down. I opened my laptop. I had a 9 a.m. with a potential new client, and I needed to review their intake file before morning. I didn't respond to the text. My co-founder asked me once, during a late night at the office when we were both running on cold coffee and stubbornness, whether I ever missed them. She knew the broad outline of the story. Not every detail, but enough. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. I miss the idea of them, I said. I miss what it would have felt like to have parents who showed up. But the actual people, the ones who sat at that table and told me to leave because my brother was uncomfortable, no, I don't miss them. I grieve them a little. That's different. She nodded. She didn't try to fix it. That's the thing about building something real. You find out who can sit with the hard things. And those people, the ones who can just be there without turning it into a lesson or a silver lining, they become your family. Not the ones who share your blood. The ones who show up with a Subaru at 9 p.m. and ask if you're hungry. The ones who make coffee in the morning. The ones who tell you the true thing, plainly, without dressing it up. I have those people now. I've had them for years. And the house I live in, the company I run, the version of myself I've become, none of it has their fingerprints on it. It was built entirely by the people who actually stayed. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I'm not telling this story for revenge. I'm not telling it to make them look bad, or to position myself as the winner of some family war I never wanted to fight. I'm telling it because I spent a long time believing that if I was just good enough, successful enough, easy enough to love, something would shift. And it didn't. And the moment I stopped waiting for it to shift and just started building, that was the moment everything changed. If you're in a situation where the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally have attached a lot of conditions, I want you to hear this. The life you build in their absence can be extraordinary. It can be more than you imagined, actually, because you build it without the weight of their approval, without the ceiling of their expectations, without performing yourself into a shape that fits their comfort. You just build. And sometimes, years later, they call, and you get to decide from a place of real strength what happens next. I decided nothing needed to happen. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt exactly right. I still think about the air mattress sometimes, not with bitterness, just as a reference point. The place I started from, 580 square feet, one working street light outside the window, and a savings account I was terrified to touch. That was the foundation. Not the mansion, not the deal, not the company. The air mattress and the decision I made on it every single morning to get up and keep going anyway. What I've come to understand, looking back at all of it, is that consequences are patient. They don't announce themselves. They just accumulate quietly, the way compound interest does, until one day the math becomes impossible to ignore. My brother spent years letting my parents absorb every consequence of his choices. My parents spent years believing that protecting him from discomfort was the same thing as loving him well. And I spent 6 weeks in that house watching all of it before I was handed the most clarifying moment of my adult life. A table, 2 parents, and the very plain truth that I was on my own. That truth broke something in me for a while, and then it built something much stronger in its place. I think about the woman I was at 26, how much energy I spent trying to make sense of a situation that didn't make sense, trying to be easier to love, trying to earn a place I shouldn't have had to earn. What I couldn't see then was that every hour I spent contorting myself for their approval was an hour I wasn't spending on becoming someone I could actually respect. The moment they made the choice for me, the moment the door essentially closed, I had nothing left to manage except myself, and that turned out to be the most important project I'd ever take on. There's something I want to be honest about, because I think it gets left out of stories like this. The rebuilding wasn't noble. It wasn't graceful. It was scared and stubborn and fueled by a specific kind of anger that I eventually had to turn into something more useful. The anger got me out of bed, but it was something else that kept me there. A slower, quieter commitment to figuring out what I was actually capable of, separate from anyone's expectations of me. That's the thing no one tells you about starting over. You have to be willing to find out who you are when no one's watching, when there's no approval to chase and no audience to perform for. The intelligence I developed wasn't just professional, though it was that too. The late-night courses, the certifications, the obsessive reading. It was the intelligence of learning to read situations clearly, to see people as they are rather than as I needed them to be, to make decisions from a grounded place rather than from fear or people-pleasing. My co-founder used to say that the best operators she'd worked with all had the same quality. They could be in a hard room and still know exactly what they thought. I worked hard to become that kind of person. And my brother's call. I won't pretend it didn't land somewhere tender. It did, not because I wanted to help him, but because it confirmed something I'd suspected. That the people who could make space for me when I needed it most would eventually need space from me. That's not revenge. That's just how it works. What you withhold and what you offer both come back to you eventually in some form. I chose to build something real, something that required me to show up with integrity even when it was hard, to keep going even when the outcome wasn't guaranteed, to make decisions I could stand behind without needing anyone's validation. That's all any of us can do, really. Build something true, and trust that the life that grows from that foundation will be more solid than anything built on someone else's approval. The people who stayed, Lena with her Subaru, Uncle Ray with his plain truths, they're the ones whose voices I carry, not the ones who asked me to leave.